Hello there. In this video, I want to talk about another subject that some parents may have a hard time addressing in homeschool, especially when we're going for bringing up topics when our children love them, because it's not a topic that maybe all of us love, nor do we expect our kids to love it. And that is how to teach history in Unschool or homeschool in any way that you want to address it. And there's no need to be afraid of history. There's so many ways to address it that are fun and that will make our children love it. As I think back on my experience with history in public schools, I remember a few times when I really did love the history lessons. And that was pretty much because I loved the teacher and I felt that the teachers presented the material in a way that was fun and interesting and that applied to my own life. So as I'm teaching my kids history, I want to approach it with this same goal in mind. And I have a few ways that I have used to do this, and I'm going to talk about them in this video. There are 11 tips that I want to share with you today that will make teaching history fun and engaging for you and your kids in your homeschool. The first way that I want to talk about teaching history in Unschool is to use some fun novels. And that can be nonfiction or historical fiction. In our case, we came across the Cragbridge Hall series, and my kids have absolutely loved it. I've read the series as well. It is an exciting adventure story that is fictional, but it deals with history in every aspect of the story. And it brings in topics like the sinking of the Titanic or the mountain men in the American West. So whenever one of these events comes up in anything we're talking about, the kids get so excited. I've read about that. I know what happened on the Titanic. I know what date it was. Let me tell you about it. And I love that. And to me, that is my goal with teaching history. Another tip for teaching history is to use a really good textbook. We want to be sure that we're picky about which textbooks we pick. For me, I don't like a lot of the textbooks that are out right now. I personally have a belief in God and I want to instill that in my children. And I feel like many textbooks leave that out of history. And to me, it's very important. So we use the Quest of a Hemisphere book, which treats the discovery of America and its foundings in its early years like a story. My husband was homeschooled and he has such fond memories of his mom sitting and reading with him together the Quest of the Hemisphere. And these stories and names, he has never forgotten them. And I think that's really impressive, and I hope that'll be true for my kids too. Tip number 3. You might start noticing a pattern with these tips in that a lot of them are books to be read. And that's not without reason. In our Unschool, we base a lot of our instruction on reading. I feel like that's a really important skill for the kids to have as a foundation, so that in the future, if they have something that they want to learn, they don't necessarily have to rely on me providing the instruction for them. They'll know how to find the information by reading books, reading online, wherever they're going to find that. So, back to our third tip, it is the Tuttle Twins series. Some of you might be familiar with these books. They are so fun. They're clever, they're beautifully illustrated, they're based on classics which relate true principles about how government works, about how economies work, about principles like the Golden Rule. And my kids love these books so much, they beg me to sit down and read it to them, even my 3-year-old. Now I know he didn't really incorporate all of the principles and knowledge. I'm sure he didn't understand most of the vocabulary, but I love that he has an excitement for it. And hopefully when he's older, he'll go back and read those and really understand them. Tip number 4, the Ken Jennings Junior Genius books. These are so much fun. tip I have for studying history and having your kids love it is to use encyclopedias. And this is one that I have to admit, I keep my shelves stocked with them, and I use it for downtime. When my kids are bored or I'm trying to cook and they're up in my grill and I need a little space, I send them off to read the encyclopedias. Encyclopedias are awesome because it's one book and you go from A to Z with all these different subjects and topics, and they can just sit and look at pictures even if they're not great at reading yet. So while they're doing it, of course, they're learning. And it might not just be history, it could incorporate some science and zoology or study of people, but either way, encyclopedias are a great way to teach history. My next tip, number 6, is using a great curriculum for studying history. The one we love is called the Family School Online, and based on our religion, this has a lot of tie-ins to the principles that we're taught in the gospel of Jesus Christ. So I love that aspect of it. And it also has really good units for learning history. So we've relied heavily on that for learning about world wars, for learning about the founding of America. It's been a really good resource. Number 7 is to utilize YouTube, which I have nothing against YouTube, obviously, but we do want to do this with caution because there are a lot of resources on YouTube that are not child-friendly. So just keep that in mind. There are really great ones that are for kids that are very appropriate and that are really fun and engaging. So just make sure you preview things before you show it to your kids. But this is a great attention getter. Kids just love watching videos anyway, so let's watch videos that teach them something specifically about history. We found really good ones for the World Wars, for lots of other topics that we've studied that show maps, that show big events that have happened, and they do it in a visual way that makes sense for a lot of kids. Tip number 8, and we're back to books with this one. It's a series of books that's the real George Washington, the real Benjamin Franklin. There are a few of those, and I just like them because they're based on true history. They're not colored in any political way like a lot of history books are nowadays that besmirch the true character of the founding fathers. Another series that's a great example of this is the George Washington hypothesis and the Abraham Lincoln hypothesis, the Pilgrim hypothesis. Tim Ballard has written those, and I have loved reading them. I don't necessarily find that all the books that I've mentioned in this whole section would be geared toward kids, but if we are reading them and gaining that knowledge for ourselves, that serves to inspire our kids to learn more about these figures, and we can clarify their questions when they come across things that might not be true that are so popularly taught in the world nowadays. As far as reading the books with the kids, it would be great to do one-on-one, or if you find a chapter that you think will apply for your kids and they'll be able to understand it, maybe doing one chapter at a time, that's worked really well for us too. Tip number 9, the 5,000 Year Leap. Cleon Skousen wrote this book, not necessarily for kids, but the principles are super basic. Maybe the vocabulary is a little bit tougher, so it might be for older children, or another one where you can read with your kids and explain the meanings that they might not understand yet. But it's a great book for foundations of government, for an appreciation of how our American government was created and the ideal way that it should be run to allow for freedom for everyone in our country. I highly recommend this book for anyone. Even if you're not going to use it in school, you ought to pick it up and read it for yourself sometime. Tip number 10, the President Makers. Again, this book isn't written for children, but it has really good information that if you can read it and understand for yourself, you will be able to relate that to your children. And the subject matter of this book talks about what has happened in America since about the year 1900, when the big three got together, Carnegie, Rockefeller, and JP Morgan, and they started bullying smaller businesses, creating monopolies that, as we are taught in public school, were busted up and no longer in effect. But this book follows those three men and the foundations that they founded, their doings and their influence on government, which we see that it has been quite high. It's not about studying conspiracy theories, but what actually happened in our country. Without getting too political, this is really good information to have to help us decide for ourselves whether what's going on today in our country is okay and why what's going on is going on. Okay, I've saved my favorite tip for last. Number 11 is the timeline card game. And I love this one because it brings so much fun into learning history, and it's so simple and easy to learn, and playing just takes a few minutes. So you have your cards, each of them have a historical event on them and the year it happened. Then on the back, it's the historical event without the year. So the idea is you have your cards and you're trying to put them in the right order and make a timeline without putting any events in the wrong order. It's just a super fun game, and it has inspired my kids to start a list of all the historical events they read about. For example, the events from Cragbridge Hall, or anytime my husband and I have mentioned anything in history, they run and grab their list and they say, wait, what year was that? And they write it down so that when they play the timeline game in the future, they'll know what all the years are. It's super cute, and it's fun to see them have such a love for history and to be inspired to want to learn about these historical events. So I hope these ideas have helped you in thinking of some ways that you can teach history to your kids. Thanks for watching. Let me know what ways you use for teaching history for your kids. I'd love to hear your ideas. I'd love to hear your questions if you have anything you'd like to see in a future post. So please like, share this video, subscribe to my channel. I'll see you next time. So that then when they play the timeline game in the